Hello from Ohio and welcome. When you ask your old son what electronics project he'd like to see made, you never know what you're going to get. When I asked Jace here, he came up with this. Let's learn how to make it together, this time on Just Making It with Josh. A little while ago, I asked my son here what he wanted to try to make. And Jace, what did you decide on?
A king boo that wiggles and lights up.
So to do this, we were going to need to not only build a base and figure out how to get sounds and lights and a servo to all go at the same time, but we'd also need to design our own king boo. Now, I've never been much of a visual artist, and most of the things I've designed have been built using a CAD program, but King Boo just isn't going to be designed that way. Instead, I was going to have to use some new tools. Let's take a look at what we're going to need to build this project. The parts list on this one, it's not too bad. To get started, we're going to need some filament to print out the base, the boo, its crown, and the pole. I went with some black, white, and red PLA from Overture. The power supply is just a standard 5-volt adapter I had laying around. I used a cord that has a USB plug on one end and a 2.1 millimeter barrel connector on the other end. That will plug into a 2.1 millimeter female adapter that is attached into the base. Now inside the brains of this project will be a Teensy 4.1 I used in another project a while ago that we no longer needed. We'll also need an SD card to store our sound on. The Teensy we can control in a clear LED, which will need a 220 ohm resistor to work. The sounds will be coming out of this simple 1 watt 8 ohm prop speaker I got from Adafruit. Now all the motion will be produced using the simpler servo we had from an Arduino Uno starter kit. We'll need a small button, again from an Arduino starter kit, and that will tell our boo when to start moving and laughing like Jace wanted. On the tool front, just the basic stuff, a 3D printer, soldering iron, heat gun, shrink tube, and solder and wire strippers. Now as far as software, again, not too much. A slicer for printing out the parts. I use Cura, like I normally use. We'll also need the Arduino IDE with the Teensyduino libraries installed. The one new piece of software we're going to use this time is Blender. I'll put a link to it in the description. It's different than FreeCAD. It's what we really needed to use on this project to get that boo designed. Now, please note that none of the products I've mentioned here sponsored any portion of this video. I'll include links for many of these products in the description. The printing is the easy part. As I've mentioned, I'm not a visual artist. That includes not just computer arts, but all visual arts. So the painting was definitely not something I enjoyed. Now, once the parts were printed, I sanded the boo and sanded and sanded and sanded some more. Then I covered it with a few layers of white spray paint. Then after that, I painted the face and the crown. Look, painting is not my thing. It's not the greatest paint job, but it'll work. Building this one, it's not too hard, but you really do need to be paying attention. Now, I started by attaching the barrel connector to the base. Nothing hard, just place it through the hole in the back and then put on the lock washer and nut. I then began doing all the wiring. I started at the LED. I began by attaching the resistor directly to the ground leg of the LED. Then I covered that connection with some heat shrink tubing. Now make sure your wires are long enough to pass all the way through the body of the boo, the little arm that goes into the base, and then still leave enough wire extra to connect to the Teensy. Once you're done with that, push the arm up into the body of the boo. When you do so, be careful that the base of the arm is facing the right direction so it can attach to the servo properly. Now, speaking of the servo, there's a spot on the base designed to hold the servo in place. with the wiring on the servo, it can be a really tight fit. So I had to kind of angle it in and push it through. After that, it's held firmly in place, but you want to make sure you do this step before you start wiring the servo up. Now it's just a matter of soldering all the wires together following the wiring diagram. As you can see, there's nothing too complicated in the wiring since there aren't any other resistors or capacitors or other little fiddly bits to mess with. Now, an important note on the wiring. You need to have the King Boo armed through this top slot before wiring things up. Otherwise, you won't actually be able to put things together. I did combine most of the ground wires of the various parts, as well as the voltage in lines, into some small harnesses to make attachment to the Teensy easier. After that, it's just a matter of wiring the Teensy to the barrel connectors. Make sure you check whether your power coming in is center positive or center negative. If you use the adapter cable that I linked to, it's going to be center positive. Once that's done, it's all downhill. The button is simply glued into place on the base. The hole should be just big enough for that button to securely fit into it. Then secure the Teensy to the base. I simply use some black electrical tape to hold it in place. You also want to secure the miniature speaker. To do that, I happen to use a little bit of hot glue on the corners. Once that was done, I secured the arm into the servo with a screw. Now try to have it straight up and down as much as possible when you get that started. Put the top of the base on and secure it in place with a little bit of glue. Then I secured the LED in place on the top of the head and attached the crown. Again, using just a little bit of glue to hold it in place. And the last part is the big red button. Just put a teeny tiny drop of glue on the end of it and push it into place. This should then allow you to trigger the button with just a gentle press. Now be careful. Too much glue equals a button that stops working. I say this based on personal experience. And let me tell you, it's not fun to have to try to fix that kind of mistake. And that's it. Plug it in, push the button, and make sure it all works. Okay, buddy, what do you think? Was this what you were picturing when you told me that you wanted to build this?
Yes.
Well, tell me a little bit more. What was your favorite part of this project?
I think probably, I think that it was probably putting the thing together.
Okay, and what was the hardest part?
Probably waiting.
Waiting on everything to print?
Yes, waiting takes forever.
Waiting takes forever. Well, look, this really was a fun project to do with Jace. It pushed me well outside my comfort zone because it required more visual artistic thought than I'm used to. That said, I'm really glad to have learned how to use Blender some, and I anticipate using more of it in the future. It's also fun to be able to listen to someone's idea like Jace here and try to make it a reality. So if you like what we did here, please leave a comment, and I really appreciate if you'd subscribe to the channel. Look forward to seeing you in the next project.